night of June 9, 1912, 8 people fell asleep inside a small white house in Villisca, Iowa. 6 of them were children. By sunrise, every single one of them was dead. No one was ever convicted. No motive was ever proven. And more than 100 years later, we still don't know who swung the axe. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders, one of the most brutal and most bewildering, unsolved crimes in American history. Stay with me until the end, because this case has a twist waiting in almost every chapter. And by the time we get to the house as it stands today, you may never look at an ordinary small town the same way again. Let's start with the town itself, because Villisca matters just as much as the murders that happened inside it. In 1912, Villisca, Iowa was home to about 2,500 people. It had a rail line, a handful of churches, a courthouse square, and the kind of quiet that only exists in places where everyone has known everyone else their entire lives. Doors stayed unlocked. Children walked home alone after dark, without anyone thinking twice. It was the kind of town people moved to, not away from, because nothing bad ever happened there. Josiah Moore was one of Villisca's success stories. He ran a farm implement business on Main Street, sold the equipment that helped local farmers work their land, and had built himself a comfortable, respectable life. He was married to Sarah Moore, and together they had 4 children: Herman, age 11, Catherine, age 10, Boyd, age 7, and Paul, age 5. On the evening of June 9th, the Moore children attended a Children's Day program at the local Presbyterian church, the kind of small-town event where every child performs a song or a recitation for a room full of proud parents. 2 of their close friends, sisters Lena and Ina Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, asked if they could come home with the Moore children for a sleepover afterward. Sarah said yes. It was the kind of ordinary request that happens in every small town, every single week. By 10 o'clock that night, all 8 of them, Josiah, Sarah, their 4 children, and the 2 Stillinger sisters, were inside the house, and most of them were already asleep. None of them knew it was the last night of their lives. Sometime after midnight, someone walked onto the Moore property. Investigators believe the killer picked up Josiah's own axe, which had been left leaning against the outside of the barn. They believe the killer entered through an unlocked door, because in Villisca in 1912, almost every door was unlocked. And somewhere in that house, in the dark, the killer began working their way from room to room. By the time they were finished, all 8 people inside that house were dead: Josiah and Sarah Moore, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, Lena and Ina Stillinger, 2 little girls who were only there because they'd wanted a sleepover. Here's the detail that still unsettles investigators to this day. Before leaving, the killer covered every mirror in the house with clothing pulled from the closets. They covered the faces of several of the victims with sheets. They left a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of water sitting untouched on the kitchen table, as though some kind of ritual had taken place. And somehow, in a house with 8 victims and repeated axe blows, not a single neighbor heard a scream, a struggle, or a single sound. The next morning, a neighbor named Mary Peckham noticed something was wrong. The Moore children hadn't come outside to play. The chickens hadn't been let out or fed. The curtains were still drawn tight, well past the hour when Sarah Moore would normally already be up, dressed, and starting her day. Mary knocked on the door. No one answered. She tried the handle. It was locked from the inside. Unsettled, she sent word to Ross Moore, Josiah's brother, who arrived a short time later with a spare key. What he found inside that house would make Villisca infamous for the next 100 years. 8 bodies, all of them bludgeoned. most of them still in their beds, many showing no signs of having woken up or fought back at all, suggesting they were killed in their sleep, one after another, without ever knowing what was happening to them. Men who walked through that house that morning, hardened farmers, undertakers, and lawmen, would describe the scene decades later as the single worst thing they had ever witnessed. And then something happened that would cripple the investigation before it even started. Word spread through Villisca fast, and within hours, half the town had walked directly through the crime scene. Neighbors wandered from room to room out of horrified curiosity. Souvenir hunters reportedly took items from the house. Nobody sealed the property. By the time actual investigators arrived from outside Villisca, whatever footprints, fingerprints, or physical evidence had existed were already trampled, smudged, or gone completely. Doctors placed the time of death somewhere between midnight and 5 in the morning. The bloodied axe was found still inside the house, but it held no usable fingerprints, and investigators found one more chilling detail. The killer had used a kerosene lamp to see by while committing the murders, and had left it behind, still burning, sitting on the floor near the bed of 10-year-old Catherine Moore. Whoever did this had taken their time. They were not frantic, they were not careless, and somehow they were never caught. So the question Villisca has been asking for over a century is simple. Who did it? And chasing that answer would go on to ruin more than one innocent life. The first suspect investigators looked at was a state senator named Frank Jones. Josiah Moore had once been employed by Jones, and according to town gossip, Josiah had left that job on bitter terms, with rumors circulating that he'd had an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. The theory was that Jones paid someone to murder Josiah and silence him permanently, and simply killed everyone else in the house to eliminate witnesses. It's a compelling story. It also had almost no hard evidence behind it, and Jones was never formally charged with anything. The second suspect was a drifter named William Mansfield, who some investigators tried to connect to a string of similar axe murders across several other states. For a while, this lead looked genuinely promising. Then, payroll records surfaced showing Mansfield had clocked in at his job on the night of the Villisca murders, hundreds of miles away. That lead collapsed almost overnight. Then there was Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims, a man with a documented, disturbing history of violence against his own mother and grandmother. Some investigators were convinced he was their man. He was never formally charged either. But the suspect who came closest to an actual conviction was a traveling minister named Reverend George Kelly. By most accounts, Kelly was an unsettling man, known for sending strange, inappropriate letters to young girls across the towns he preached in. And Kelly had been in Villisca on the night of the murders, delivering the very same Children's Day sermon the Moore children and the Stillinger sisters had attended just hours before they died. Kelly eventually confessed to committing the murders. Then, he recanted his confession entirely. Then, under pressure from investigators using methods that would never hold up by today's legal standards, he confessed again. He stood trial twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury, unable to agree on a verdict. The second time, a jury acquitted him completely. To this day, historians remain divided over whether George Kelly was a disturbed man who simply made a false confession under pressure, or whether the town of Villisca let the real killer walk free. And that is where the trail goes cold. No one was ever convicted for the murder of 8 people in that small white house. Over 100 years later, the Villisca Axe Murders remain, officially, unsolved. Here's where the story gets even stranger. The Villisca house still stands today, restored almost exactly as it looked in 1912, right down to the layout of the beds and the furniture in every room, and you can actually walk through it yourself. People who visit, and thousands of them have, often describe the same unsettling experiences. A heaviness in the air the moment you step inside. Cold spots in rooms with no obvious draft. The sound of footsteps crossing the floor upstairs when nobody else is in the house. Whether or not you believe any of that, there's something undeniably chilling about standing in the exact room where an entire family and 2 young house guests were murdered in their sleep by someone who may have gotten away with it entirely. So why does this case still matter, more than a century later? Maybe it's because we want to believe that horrific crimes eventually get solved, that justice always catches up eventually, no matter how long it takes. Villisca is proof that sometimes it simply doesn't. 8 people went to sleep in a quiet, ordinary town, and someone walked out of that house into the dark and vanished completely, and to this day, nobody knows their name. If this deep dive into one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries kept you hooked, tell me in the comments who you think really committed the Villisca Axe Murders. Frank Jones, William Mansfield, Henry Lee Moore, Reverend George Kelly, or someone whose name we still don't know. And if you want more real crime stories told exactly like this, subscribe to Crime Through Time, because this is far from the last unsolved mystery we're going to dig into together.